Welcome to the inaugural episode of Rival Concepts, a series where I share my character concepts for new Marvel Rivals heroes and villains. These ideas are fan-made and completely original. I don't want to confuse anyone into thinking these are real leaks or officially announced characters. Over the course of the series, I'm going to be rounding up like-minded characters that I think should be released together or otherwise have history together in what I'm calling collections. To kick off the show, we'll be taking a look at the heroes I've wanted in Rivals from day one. These are characters I love in other media and have a strong sense they'll be added sooner rather than later. I'm going to structure this video by each character's role, starting with the Vanguard role, then moving on to Duelist, and finishing off with Strategist. Our lineup for today is Ghost Rider, Cyclops, Ant-Man, and Nick Fury. This is the Most Wanted collection. Few characters in the Marvel canon aura farm quite as hard as Johnny Blaze, also known as the Ghost Rider. I was first introduced to the character as many young kids in the mid-aughts were, with Nicolas Cage's iconic performance. Is the movie good? Hell no. It's full of bad writing,
I could only change one more time and I was saving it for this.
a boring love subplot,
You still like Italian?
and downright bad editing.
Still like Italian?
Do I still love the crap out of that zany balls-to-the-wall movie anyway? Abso-fucking-lutely. My biggest gripe with the 2007 film by far is that there are only really two scenes that do Ghost Rider's imposing heavy metal album cover energy justice. Those scenes being his first full transformation in the warehouse, where Nick Cage lets his manic pixie devil worshipper out, and the other where Johnny and the caretaker ride into the desert to retreat from Blackheart. Most other times we see him, he's kind of doing some goofy stuff while getting a pass because he looks like that. I wanted to really emphasize the badass aura this guy carries on his spiky shoulders with my Rival's concept for him. Ghost Rider's primary attack, Vengeful Lash, is a simple 4-hit combo where he swings his chains in a fast, close arc. The first two attacks strike with each chain for small damage. The third is a cross strike with both chains and deals moderate damage, while the fourth attack is a large downward strike with both chains. There's a slight wind-up between the third and fourth strikes, but when it hits, it sends the chains far out in front of Ghost Rider. Enemies hit by this fourth attack are grounded if airborne and sear with big damage. This combo pairs well with his secondary attack, Hell's Lasso. This ability lets the rider twirl his chain overhead as he targets an enemy before launching it at high speed. If an enemy is lassoed, they're tethered to the rider and can't move further than the chain traveled to intercept them. They'll receive periodic damage as the chain heats up around them. The chain will only hold them for a short time, but Ghost Rider can use this ability again to harshly yank the target to himself. This is slight damage on its own, but its real value comes from the ability's secondary function. Upon the enemy being yanked, the rider's primary attack will automatically reset to its fourth strike in the combo and hit without a windup. This is a devastating combo, useful for picking off stragglers and fleeing targets, especially flyers who may be creating problems for your team. Ghost Rider has a passive ability, Hellish Restoration, that lets him restore a quarter of his missing health when he hasn't taken damage in a short period. If this passive kicks in, the first attack he receives instantly boosts him with Hellfire Infusion, which I'll explain in a second. Ghost Rider's first ability, Sin Eater, is a simple shield the rider can use to protect himself or an ally. Reaching into the darkness of an enemy's soul, Ghost Rider rips it away to deal moderate damage, which is directly converted into a shield. However, a secondary function comes into play when used with his second ability, Hellfire Infusion. Ghost Rider ordains an ally, giving them increased damage output for a short time. Should the ordained ally be defeated while they are infused, Ghost Rider gains a small shield. If the ally remains alive through the infusion's duration, the rider is given an even greater shield that deals damage on its own to enemies around him. If Hellfire Infusion is active when Ghost Rider uses Sin Eater, the latter ability will summon a soul orb on the ground that can be picked up by another ally. The orb grants a shield of its own, and damage done to the ally bearing it directly boosts Ghost Rider's damage output. This ability combo would be useful for buffing a dual tank comp with even greater shielding and damage, or, even more appropriately, for keeping squishy DPS characters alive with a solo tank comp. This big burly biker man has one of the most iconic signature moves in all of media, which I directly stole for his next ability, the Penance Stare. Ghost Rider grabs an enemy in melee range, holding them aloft and carrying them for a short window of time. The rider can throw the enemy forward, excellent for positioning someone into a combo, or pull them in close to burn their soul. While performing the Penance Stare, the rider is immobilized as he quickly sears a large chunk off the enemy's health. He can be defeated during this channel, so it's best used with the protection of others around. Other allies can't attack the held target while their soul is being burned. After the target is released, they suffer an anti-heal debuff for a few seconds. This makes them easy to pick off even in a team fight. But wait, you might be saying, Ghost Rider's most iconic feature isn't his pendant stare or his flaming skull, it's his flaming motorcycle. You, my friend, are exactly right. I went back and forth for a long time deciding if the Spirit of Vengeance should have his classic chopper at all times or not. In the end, it felt more appropriate to give the Hell Cycle the reverence it deserves and to save it for a rip-roaring ultimate. Summon the Rider has Ghost Rider bellow deeply, sending a call to the underworld. The Hell Cycle screams onto the battlefield from below ground, the rider mounting it as it tears past him. The bike churns forward in a straight line at Mach speed before reaching a point and whipping back around for a second run. The bike's trajectory can be redirected at the moment the Hell Cycle hits its furthest point and comes back around. After reaching the end of the second run, the rider dismounts and his bike returns to the underworld, awaiting his next call. The ground under its wheels becomes consecrated with hellfire. This consecrated ground slows and heavily burns enemy, while also giving allies the benefits of hellfire infusion. The path smolders for a time before shrinking and decaying away. On top of being a huge damage dealer, one of the best utilities of this ultimate is its appliance of hellfire infusion, which allows Ghost Rider time to replenish his cooldowns to continue the fight. Ghost Rider would be an all-around damage dealer with a beefy health bar, most useful for picking up scraps and leaving few survivors on the field. His overall inhuman survivability lends himself to the Vanguard role in my opinion, with a good sprinkle of crowd control and team-up potential. Speaking of team-ups, I made sure to include one in this toolkit. In a cult defender of Earth through and through, Johnny Blaze's power is best served alongside the Midnight Suns. Ghost Rider becomes the anchor for this team-up, causing his Hellfire infusion to grant an even larger boon of damage output. The other members of this team-up, Doctor Strange, Magic, and Agatha Harkness, that's right, I have a concept for her too, each gain the Midnight Collaboration ability. This ability works differently for each hero, essentially working like a buff for one of their existing powers. Doctor Strange, for example, adds a chunk of durability to his shield. It'll soak up all the damage it can until that added chunk is depleted, causing a wave of hellfire to spit out as it finishes. Magic gains increased damage and attack speed with her primary and secondary attacks for the duration, while adding a high chance to set enemies ablaze with hellfire on each attack. Agatha's ability set is still being touched up, so I'll save her team-up ability for a later video when I can showcase her. Understatement of the century, I love Cyclops. He's tactical, he stands firmly by his principles, he's a badass at every opportunity, and he is absolutely in a polycule with Jean, Emma, and Logan. He's everything I aspire to be as a person. I can't tell you just when my love of this character came to pass, but I can assure you it did not start with the 2000s X-Men series. The horse is dead, so I won't belabor the point, but man has it been a rough ride for my boy on the big screen. I have faith Marvel Studios will do right by the character, and frankly James Marsden with the upcoming MCU adaptation. But man did Bryan Singer not know how to use this character.
Hey, it's me.
Prove it.
You're a dick.
Okay.
Cyclops means a lot to me, partly due to my overall love of leader characters, evidenced by my fawning over Captain America, my favorite superhero of all time, and partly because I feel a sense of kindred melancholy about the misunderstandings people tend to have when they talk about Scott. I don't pretend to be a comics fanboy, but his lasers push, they don't burn, come on! Anyway, when designing my concept for Summers, I wanted to keep things simple and not overfluff his ability set. I imagine him playing the midline and keeping the enemy team back with lots of CC from his optic blast. Cyclops' primary attack, X-Strike, is a very basic right-left jab sequence, good for dealing some small damage in melee range. His secondary, I-Trigger, is a standard optic blast which deals much more damage and pushes an enemy back when struck. These optic blasts are tied to charges, similar to Spider-Man's webs, Mantis' life orbs, or Gambit's cards. These will recharge fairly quickly on their own, but each attack from X-Strike restores a piece of a charge to more quickly regain power. Psy also has a passive ability, Born Leader, that comes into play when near teammates. The idea is simple. When Cyclops is near an ally, he gains a damage boost. This would stack with each nearby ally, allowing him to deal significant damage in a team fight. I imagine this passive would make players think about their movements more carefully, making sure they don't endanger the team by straying too far and weakening their damage dealer. For Cyclops' first ability, Resistance Laser, I started leaning into the heavy crowd control vibe I imagine he'd have. He channels a narrow, steady beam from his eyes that would continually push an enemy back if they're caught in its path. All the while, they'd take continuous damage from the pinpoint blast. This would help give allies room to breathe if, say, a dive hero hits the backline. It might also be a useful tool for keeping that one enemy off the point as they scramble from spawn in overtime, sparing everyone from that never-ending torrent of trades as the clock freezes. Cyclops' next ability, Fractal Cannon, works almost like a shotgun. After a quick charge up, he releases a broad flash of power in a fairly close area in front of him. This would punch hard against enemies to deal a lot of damage and throw them backwards, even knocking them prone if close enough to Psy himself. A secondary benefit of this ability is that it would temporarily add 2 charges to his overall eye trigger count, and immediately replenish 2 charges. This would be a clutch ability with a longer cooldown, hitting very hard and changing the balance of his rotation in his favor with the additional optic blast at his disposal. I was considering this character's mobility when designing his kit, and wanted to include a movement ability of some kind. While I was inspired by the warehouse scene in X-Men 97's first episode, the scene where Scott moves around the fight by blasting the ground, essentially launching himself backwards, I ultimately thought that might be a little disorienting as an ability. Instead, I opted for Heroic Leap, a basic directional dash based on which way he's moving rather than looking. During the dash itself, he'd gain damage reduction, as if evading attacks. His eye trigger optic blast would also deal a little more damage for a short time after dashing. This could pair well with the use of Fractal Cannon, as the player could blast an encroaching group of enemies, granting himself 2 charges of eye trigger, before dashing away to give himself even more distance, pummeling away at their onslaught from afar. Now, I mentioned aura farming when talking about Ghost Rider, but man oh man is Scott Summers no slouch in that department. One of my all-time favorite moments from this character happens during the Joss Whedon and John Cassaday Astonishing X-Men run. A Sentinel threatens the X-Mansion, but Cyclops, Wolverine, and Colossus have somewhere more important to be. In a moment of pure anger and determination, Scott rips off his visor and firmly declares, "I want this thing off my lawn." He all but disintegrates the Sentinel, and a grove's worth of trees for good measure. This scene gives me chills every time I see it, especially with the added line from Logan where he both respects and almost fears Scott. I showed all my cards when designing Psy's ultimate ability, Off My Lawn. Cyclops roars in anger, ripping his visor off and releasing a devastating optic blast. This would be incredibly wide, but not especially tall, so as not to make it a complete team wipe. Psy would be anchored in place during this ult, and his aiming would be slowed. This means positioning would be key even before starting the ult, similar to Hela's Goddess of Death. The blast itself would deal massive damage and, of course, send enemies backwards against its power. As an added bonus, Eye Trigger deals extra damage for a short time after the ult ends as Scott continues seething with power. Cyclops would be a strong damage dealer and valuable crowd control specialist, making sure enemy fronts are kept at bay and the team combos are well positioned. While I do consider this power kit simple in many regards, I don't find it lacking. A character with few abilities, like Ultron, can still make a big impact if they're played smart and played advantageously. Scott Summers has been the leader of the X-Men for more of his life than not. While I had ideas for a team-up regarding the other well-known captains, Storm and Emma, I decided to stir the thruple pot and make Phoenix the anchor between herself, Cyclops, and Wolverine. Paramore's trio allows Phoenix to deal more damage and gives the other two the Love and Loathing ability. When activated, both heroes burn with Jean's psionic flame and release it in a special attack. Cyclops firing a beam similar to his resistance laser, and Wolverine lashing out similar to his vicious rampage. I'm aware that Jean and Logan already have a team-up that was considered controversial for a time, but I rarely see it in game, and I imagine if NetEase ever truly added Scott, there would absolutely be a replacement team-up between all 3 of them. From one Scott to another, we're going to move on to a character with a little more gameplay complexity. Right off the bat, I'll clear up any doubts or confusion. Ant-Man is fun. He's either the lovable engineer Scott Lang or the cunning genius Hank Pym. Whatever way you prefer your myrmecologist, this is a character deeply rooted in not taking oneself too seriously. Growing up, I knew Ant-Man as 2 people, as Hank was mostly used in cartoons I'd watched as a kid, and Scott was our main Ant-Man in the MCU. I've personally always preferred the protege over the mentor. There's no real rhyme or reason, I just find Scott Lang's salt-of-the-earth energy more appealing than Hank's high and mighty intellect. Scott has been the quintessential straight man in an otherwise absurd world for a long time. This is helped by the wonderful Paul Rudd's depiction of the character in the MCU, where every line is delivered like he's begging someone else to comment on how silly their lives and jobs are.
Yeah, like a time machine.
Is that anybody's sandwich?
So, with that in mind, when talking about my concept for Ant-Man and rivals, just know that I'm envisioning none other than Mr. Lang. Ant-Man's primary attack, Pym Punch, is a 1-2 combo. Every fourth strike generates a charge of Pym particles. That's right, we're doing charges again because Builder Spender is a fun rotation system. Before talking about Ant-Man's secondary, I'm going to first talk about the two passives I've given this character. The first is Pym Particle Pursuit, which will generate charges of Pym particles when using some of his abilities. 3 charges will equal 1 stack of particles, of which Ant-Man can build 3. Stacks, rather than charges, are consumed to use most of his abilities. Additionally, should Ant-Man generate more charges beyond his capacity, he'll gain a short and sweet damage buff. The second passive I've given Ant-Man isn't even Ant-Man's at all. That's right, I lied to you. We're doing Ant-Man and the Wasp, baby! I considered making these two their own heroes, but their similarities outweigh their differences. So I bundled them into one rival. Wasp works in a support capacity, more of an automated turret than a whole other hero like Cloak and Dagger. Ant-Man's secondary, Little Sting, fires 3 small, mid-range projectiles that deal damage over time. Similar to Pym Punch, every third strike with Little Sting generates a single charge of Pym particles. This secondary is assisted by the duo's other passive, Big Time Assist, which causes Wasp to sporadically fire stingers at Ant-Man's target as she buzzes around him. This would occur almost like an auto turret after Ant-Man starts damaging an enemy. These stingers are very low damage, don't cause damage over time, and aren't a guaranteed hit. However, whenever Ant-Man successfully builds a stack of particles, these auto stingers would fire faster and hit harder. Ant-Man's first ability, Jump and Tap, consumes a completed stack of Pym particles that allow him to shrink for a quick moment as he dashes forward. As he returns to normal size, he delivers a powerful upward kick and goes end over end. Once he lands the backflip, the ability moves onto his second phase. Ant-Man can consume another stack of particles to shrink and dash once again. As he embiggens, he launches into a hard dropkick to deal big damage and knock an enemy prone. After that, the ability returns to its first phase. This makes for a fun combo to sprinkle in among primary attacks, as you'll be building stacks with each successful strike. His next ability, Release the Ants, allows for some damage over time. Ant-Man speaks to his colony, causing them to swarm an enemy and pepper them with damage. Once finished, they'll return to Ant-Man. The swarm can be defeated by enemies while they're on the move, but grant a charge of particles should they successfully make their way back to Scott. This ability has 2 uses that replenish over time. Throwing a swarm in the middle of a combo would be a great way to multitask, draining an enemy's health bar and giving the player a decent chance to build more particles. For his final ability, Size Matters, Ant-Man consumes a stack of particles and fully shrinks to a microscopic size. While tiny, he's undetectable enemies that don't have extrasensory powers. Daredevil, for example, could still see Ant-Man. While Scott himself suffers a massive damage reduction in this state, he also becomes impossible to hit. He also gains free movement through space as Wasp picks him up and carries him around. Additionally, he can pester an enemy by climbing aboard them and attacking in a similar vein to Release the Ants. This ability isn't permanent, but lasts for a good amount of time or until the player chooses to end it. We all love that Ant-Man is a man the size of an ant, obviously. But what about a man the size of a giant? I don't have a good segue for this. Ant-Man's ultimate lets him turn into Giant Man. Embiggen allows Scott to grow to enormous size, dealing damage with every step he takes. He gains a temporary moveset while in this state, such as Bug Crusher, which lets him stomp the ground beneath him to deal huge damage and knock back to enemies. He also gains the Super Size Me ability, which lets him consume stacks of Pym particles directly to increase his damage by a huge margin. Once the ult finishes, Ant-Man returns to normal size, and suffers from shrinking sickness, which makes him unable to consume particles to shrink or embiggen for a short period. It was as I was really tooling out this character's power set that I realized just how versatile Ant-Man really is. Shrinking is what he's known for, but the number of applications that has is absurd. Not to mention having a psychic link to a whole colony of ants, of which he can grow and shrink if need be. I wanted to try touching on every facet of his broad power set without making him feel too overpowered. I think the methodical building and spending of Pym particles lends itself to a natural flow of gameplay. He doesn't just come out of the gate being able to pull off his most well-known magic trick. I see Ant-Man as being a dive hero with good teamfight applications, able to finish enemies off with ability combos while compounding his power through excess particle stacks. There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable individuals to fight the battles that we never could. The man to bring that idea to life, to reality, was a spy with an eye in the sky, Nick Fury. I know we're all picturing Sam Jackson right now, and that's for good reason. I don't pretend to know who would have been better casting for this character, but luckily we live in a world where none of us have to think about it.
I recognize the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it.
Director.
It took me a long time to really come around to Fury as a character. I always had an itch in the back of my mind that told me not to trust him, much in the way he doesn't trust anyone else. I was like Cap in The Winter Soldier, slowly peeling back the layers of this spy game that was being played right under our noses. It wasn't until Age of Ultron that I felt I could take a breath when he was on screen. He shows up out of the blue, offering his sage wisdom at a time of crisis and steering the team back onto the true path. He rallies everyone just as he did in 2012, and does it again when he emerges from the clouds of Sokovia with the original helicarrier.
Fury, you son of a bitch. Ooh, you kiss your mother with that mouth?
He won my respect and my trust in that film alone. I finally understood that he was the guy to get his hands dirty so that others could continue, clean and free. That idea was what prompted my concept for him in Rivals. I saw Fury as a strategist from day one. He's rarely in the fray getting down and dirty with the heroes of Earth. The images that come to mind when I think of Fury are those that show him on the bridge of the helicarrier, monitoring conflict from a bird's eye view. This was the impetus with which I built his moveset around. Fury's primary attack, Standard Issue, is a very simple sidearm that fires up to 6 rounds before reloading. His secondary, Close Quarters Combat, is an automatic melee attack sequence. Fury punches twice and delivers a sweeping roundhouse kick to an enemy, pushing them back to give himself room to breathe. Fury's passive, Director's Insight, activates when an ally dies anywhere on the map. For a brief time after, he moves faster and deals more damage with his basic attacks. More importantly, his ability cooldowns are greatly reduced for the duration. Fury's first ability, Oversight, summons up to 2 drones that each encircle an ally, firing in bursts upon nearby enemies. The drones can be attacked but will explode upon destruction to deal some last-ditch damage. When an ally has a drone on them, they'll receive additional healing and shielding from Fury's other abilities. 2 drones can be placed on a single ally, which compounds the effect even further. Prudent Resupply, Fury's next ability, removes the need for allies to reload while inside an area he targets. This is channeled over a few seconds, and as it ends, all allies automatically reload. This is true also if someone leaves the target area before it finishes channeling. Ally ammunition is doubled for a short time after, further reducing the need to waste time reloading. For his final ability, Direct Orders, Fury rallies his team by giving them shields, a brief heal over time, and increased movement speed. This order goes out over all channels, and applies these benefits regardless of proximity to Fury. Any allies under the protection of Fury's drones receive greater shielding and healing. This wouldn't be a Nick Fury homage if I didn't include the helicarrier to some degree. Instead of just having the thing appear in-game, I opted for a suborbital laser that fires from the warship from parts unknown. Fury's ultimate, Sword and Shield, calls down a massive beam of energy to devastate a target location. Enemies are hit with big damage and an even bigger slow. Allies are given shields that grow in size the longer they're inside the beam's radius. The most powerful caveat to this ultimate is that anyone, friend or foe, defeated inside its radius respawns faster. Not by a lot, but at least a couple seconds. This would make it a clutch move to pull in a team fight without being completely OP. Nick Fury would play like a backline support in a similar vein to Loki, taking potshots from afar and using subversion to keep allies topped off with health. His drones would best be served keeping a second healer alive in the backline and helping a tank keep the front line solid. The extra healing drone bearers receive would make moving them around the field advantageous, just as Ultron moves his own drone to allies in the most danger. This has been the Most Wanted collection. These were some of my earlier hero concepts, so they're not the most polished, but I had a lot of fun ideating them nonetheless. I also had a lot of fun making this video, and I hope you had fun watching. I'm planning on making this series a mainstay on my channel, so fingers crossed you're wanting to see more. Please consider liking and subscribing if you like this kind of content, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!